My life over the past 2 years had been a study in controlled restoration. By day, I worked on the bones of old Philadelphia, coaxing life back into tired brownstones and forgotten libraries. I understood the language of limestone and load-bearing walls, predictable, steeped in history, with a clear blueprint to follow. By night, I returned to my apartment, a minimalist space of cool grays and clean lines, where the only hint of movement was dust motes dancing in the evening sun. It was a quiet existence, and I'd convinced myself it was exactly what I wanted. Then came a Tuesday like any other, when my phone buzzed against the worn oak of my drafting table. The name on the screen felt like a ghost. Betty. 2 years of silence. It had started as a trickle, missed calls, unanswered texts, before swelling into a flood that washed away the foundation of what I'd once thought was an unshakable friendship. The three of us, me, Betty, and Martha, had been inseparable in college, a perfect tripod. I was the anchor, Martha the strategist, and Betty the wild, luminous energy that bound us together. After graduation, they'd moved to New York, and I'd stayed. Distance, it seemed, had cracked the architecture of our bond beyond what I'd thought reparable. I let the phone ring, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into the hushed archives of the Athenaeum Library, where I was sketching the details of a wrought iron staircase. The vibration stopped. I exhaled, my pencil suddenly heavy. My focus was shattered, my carefully curated piece pierced by a single name. It buzzed again. This time, I answered, my voice deliberately neutral. Hello? Angie?
It's you.
Oh, thank God. Betty's voice was exactly as I remembered, warm as honey, brisk as wind, carrying that breathless energy that had once convinced me to skip a final for a road trip to see a meteor shower. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I was working, I said, a lame excuse. I was always working. Of course you were, probably saving some gorgeous old building from the wrecking ball, right? She didn't wait for a response. Listen, I know it's been too long. Ridiculously long. But we're in town, Martha and me. For the week. My stomach tightened.
We.
Betty and Martha had always been a pair, but now the word felt heavier, charged. Oh, was all I could manage. We have to see you, she pressed. It's been too long. We've missed you like crazy. Coffee tomorrow? That little place near Rittenhouse Square, the Gilded Cup? I glanced around the archive room, at rows of leather-bound books, each a story contained and ordered. My life was like this room. Neat, controlled, safe. Betty was a gust of wind threatening to send pages flying. But a part of me, one I'd walled off long ago, yearned for the storm. Okay, Betty. I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign. Tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat there for ages, the library's silence pressing in. The call had stirred something deep, a phantom ache for a time when my life wasn't so quiet, so solitary, when it was defined by their chaotic, brilliant presence. The Gilded Cup was pure Betty, white marble, brushed gold, sterile elegance that felt more suited for art acquisitions than mending a 2-year rift. I arrived early, a nervous habit, and chose a corner table with a clear view of the door. I needed to see them first, to brace myself. When they walked in, the cafe's hum seemed to dim. They moved as one, complementary forces. Betty's wild chestnut hair was now a sharp, artistic bob, her eyes scanning the room with bright intensity. Martha, ever the calm center, followed, her gaze steady, her dark suit impeccably tailored. She spotted me first, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. She nudged Betty, and Betty's face broke into a grin so bright it felt like a lifeline. I stood as they approached, my heart stuttering. The reunion was a flurry of awkward hugs and, "You look amazing," We settled into the small chairs, a triangle of people who once fit perfectly, now fumbling to remember the angles. "You really do look incredible, Angie," Betty said, her eyes lingering. "Work suits you, this serious, focused look." "It's just work," I shrugged, feeling plain beneath her gaze. I wore my usual uniform, dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, hair pulled back, practical, unremarkable. Conversation started haltingly, benign updates on jobs and apartments. Martha was a rising star at a New York corporate law firm. Betty curated a Chelsea gallery. They spoke with a casual we, an intimacy that was both beautiful and alienating. I watched them, and the change I'd sensed over the phone became stark. This wasn't just a friendship evolved, it was something deeper. Martha's hand resting on the back of Betty's chair, a silent, steady gesture. Betty glancing at Martha before finishing a thought, a quiet check-in. They were a closed circuit, and I was an outsider, a loose wire. "And you?" Martha asked, pulling me from my observations. "Besides saving the city's landmarks, what's new? Anyone special?" The question felt like a probe.
No.
"Just work," I repeated, staring at my cup. My last relationship had ended in a messy collapse, leaving me wary of building anything new. I didn't want to talk about it. Betty reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine as she flagged the waiter. 3 lattes, please." The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a sudden warmth through me. I pulled my hand back, tucking it into my lap. She pretended not to notice, her smile unwavering, but I caught a flicker in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or resolve. They told stories of a disastrous gallery opening, their voices weaving together, a perfect duet. I listened, smiling at the right moments, feeling like an audience member at a play I'd once starred in. When the coffee came, the mug's warmth was a small comfort. As we prepared to leave, Betty's hand landed on my arm, gentle but firm. "This was nice, but it's not enough. We want to really see you. Come to our hotel tonight. We have a suite. Room service, wine. Like old times." "I don't know." I hesitated, the quiet of my apartment calling to me. "Please," Martha added, her voice low and persuasive. "We have something we need to talk to you about." The gravity in her tone made refusal impossible. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. And I knew, with a sinking feeling, that my carefully ordered world was about to be upended. Their hotel suite was less a room than an apartment, with sweeping views of city lights that glittered like spilled jewels. The decor was modern and impersonal, but they'd made it theirs. Betty's sketchbook lay open on the coffee table, a chaotic pencil drawing of a heart tangled in ivy. Martha's leather briefcase sat neatly by a chair. Art and order miniature. Betty poured me a glass of deep red wine, moving with easy grace. Martha watched from an armchair, her expression unreadable. The air hummed with unspoken words. "It's good to be back in Philly," Betty said, handing me the glass. "New York's so new. You forget what it's like to be surrounded by things with history. Things with good bones." We made small talk for a while, a thin curtain over the real reason I was there. Finally, Martha set her glass down with a soft click, a signal. "Angie," she began, her voice calm, the same tone she used to dismantle witnesses in court. "We know this is sudden. Showing up after 2 years. We're sorry." Betty jumped in, perching on the arm of my chair. She was close enough that I smelled her perfume, rain and paper, clean and faint. Things got complicated. We were figuring ourselves out. I looked between them. "It seems like you have." A slow smile spread across Betty's face. "We have. But something's missing." I sipped my wine, the liquid bitter in my throat. I knew, on some primal level, where this was going. I just couldn't fathom it. "In college," Martha continued, leaning forward, "it was always the 3 of us. A system. Each of us gave the other something we needed. You grounded us, Angie. You were our foundation." "But foundations are meant to be built upon," Betty murmured, her voice softening. Her fingers brushed my shoulder, light as a feather. "After we moved, we tried, just the 2 of us. It's good, strong. But it's not whole. It's like a beautiful building missing a crucial pillar." My breath caught. The metaphor was so direct, so tailored to who I was, it felt like a physical blow. "We didn't just miss our friend," Betty said, her gaze intense. "We miss our third. Our balance." The room fell silent, save for distant traffic. Their proposal hung in the air, shimmering impossible. People didn't do this. Sensible people didn't rewrite the rules of relationships. I searched for a hint of jest, a crack in their unity. But there was none. Betty's expression was raw, hopeful. Martha's was steady, resolute. They'd planned this. This was a blueprint. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "We've never been more serious," Martha said simply. Betty's hand moved to my hair, tucking a stray strand behind my ear. The gesture was intimate, sincere, and it short-circuited my brain. Beneath the shock, beneath the disbelief, I felt a flicker, a pull, magnetic and terrifying, toward the impossible structure they wanted to build. And they wanted me to be its cornerstone. I left the hotel in a daze, the night air doing little to clear my head. Their words echoed relentlessly. Our third pillar. Our balance. My language, architecture, twisted into something unrecognizable. Back in my apartment, I paced the polished floors. My sanctuary felt like a cage. Their proposal was emotional vandalism, smearing chaos over my clean walls. They'd vanished for 2 years, leaving me to patch my own life, then returned with a wrecking ball, expecting gratitude. I sank onto the sofa, the leather cold against my skin. Logic screamed. A 3-person relationship was untenable, a logistical nightmare, a breeding ground for jealousy. It defied every blueprint I knew. But then a memory surfaced. Senior year, a thunderstorm, our tiny dorm room, power out. Martha read by candlelight. I sketched. Betty told wild stories, her face animated in the flicker. At one point, she'd flopped between us, arm over my shoulders, head in Martha's lap. The storm raged outside, but in that circle of light, there was peace, completeness. We fit. The 3 of us, unbreakable. The memory felt like a betrayal. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely insane. That we'd been a kind of whole, and I'd never had the words to name it. I shook it off. That was college. This was real life. I'd learned the hard way how fragile relationships were. My ex, Mark, had been a shoddy builder, his infidelity bringing our life crashing down. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. And Betty and Martha were asking me to bet on something infinitely riskier. I picked up my phone, fingers hovering over Betty's name. I had to end this. I typed a text. "I'm flattered, but I can't. What you're suggesting is impossible. I value our friendship, but that's all it can be." It was polite, firm. I hit send before I could waver. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a hollow pang. Regret, sharp and unexpected. I'd restored order, reinforced my walls. But the fortress felt colder than ever. For a day, silence. I threw myself into work at the Athenaeum. The scent of old paper and wood polish a comfort. I convinced myself I'd handled it perfectly, clear, kind. They'd understand, retreat, and our friendship could heal at a distance. I was sanding the grand staircase banister when a voice behind me said, "It's even more beautiful up close." I startled. Betty stood there, in a simple black dress, looking like modern art dropped into a Gilded Age painting. She wasn't dressed for a construction site.
"Betty,
"What are you doing here?" My voice was sharper than intended. She didn't flinch. "I was at the gallery down the street. Thought I'd check if you were here." She ran a hand lightly over the polished wood. "Reverent. You have a gift, Angie. Seeing potential in what's old and faded, bringing it back to life." Her words were a tool, slipping past my defenses. She spoke my language. "It's just a job," I mumbled, turning back to my work, shoulders tense. She stood beside me, close enough that I felt her presence. "No, it's a calling.
preserving beauty."
Honoring the original vision." She paused. "Sometimes, a design is unconventional, doesn't follow the rules. But that doesn't make it less valid. Sometimes, those are the most enduring structures." I gripped the sandpaper until my knuckles whitened. This was her strategy. Gentle, intellectual siege. Framing their proposal as a brilliant design, not chaos. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a wrapped package. It was a rare book, out of print, about Art Nouveau architecture and nature. Thoughtful, specific, expensive.
Perfect.
I saw it in a village bookstore and thought of you, she said. No strings attached. Just a gift for a friend. Thank you, I said, voice tight. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She smiled, small and genuine. We're in town a little longer. The invitation stands for friendship. For whatever. She left, heels clicking softly on marble. I held the book, its weight a reminder. This was a peace offering, far more dangerous than any argument. Days later, Martha struck, logical, precise, a counterpoint to Betty's artistry. It was a coordinated campaign, and I couldn't help but admire the strategy. An email arrived. Professional inquiry. Martha explained her firm was involved in a historic property zoning case and needed an expert recommendation. She suggested coffee to discuss it, plausible, professional. Her office was the opposite of Betty's gallery, a high-rise of glass and steel, exuding power and confidence. Martha looked at home there, in a sharp navy suit, hair pulled back in an elegant knot. Control, competence, personified. She got straight to the point, asking incisive questions about historic preservation laws. I found myself drawn in, impressed by her intelligence. For 20 minutes, we were just professionals, comfortable, safe. Then, after I gave her names, she leaned back, steepling her fingers. The professional mask softened. Thank you, Angela, she said, using my full name, a subtle distance. I appreciate your expertise. On a personal note, I hope Betty didn't overstep at your work. It was fine, I said too quickly. Good. She held my gaze. This idea we presented, it's not a whim. We've talked about it for a long time. I stayed silent, hands wrapped around my coffee cup. Betty and I are different, she continued, voice even. She's emotion, intuition, creativity. I'm logic, precedent, risk assessment. She pushes me to feel. I keep her grounded. We work because we balance each other. She laid it out like a legal argument, evidence, structure. For that balance to be complete, she went on, we need a third element. An anchor. Someone who understands structure, values history, has quiet strength to complement Betty's fire and my rigidity. She smiled faintly. Logically, you're the only candidate. I was stunned. She'd stripped the emotion from their proposal, presenting it as a rational conclusion. It was audacious, appealing to the part of me that trusted blueprints and structural integrity. I know you're afraid, she said, voice softening. I know you've been hurt. Mark was a shoddy contractor, cutting corners. We're not him. Our foundation is solid. We're just proposing an expansion.
She paused.
I'm not asking for an answer, just to consider the logic. Don't let the unconventional design scare you from something sound, something beautiful. I left her office feeling like I'd lost a case. I didn't know I was fighting. Betty had appealed to my heart, Martha to my head. They were dismantling my defenses one by one. And the terrifying truth? They were starting to make sense. The next invitation came via Martha's text. Weekend drive? Found a country spot with amazing old barns. Thought of you. No agenda. The last two words were bait, and I took it. I was tired of the tension, the feeling of being a project. A day without pressure felt like a truce. We met on a crisp Saturday morning. Betty drove a stylish SUV, music playing softly. Martha navigated, efficient. I climbed into the back, the space feeling vast, lonely. Glad you're here, Betty said, smiling in the rearview mirror. The drive out of the city was quiet. Urban brick and steel gave way to rolling green hills. Conversation was light. Music, changing leaves, a funny story from Martha's work. It felt normal. Dangerous. The farm-turned-antique market was my element. We wandered cavernous barns, air thick with old wood, dust, beeswax. I ran my hands over dovetail joints, pointed out hand-forged nails, explained the history of a faded Victorian settee. They listened, not out of politeness, but genuine interest. Betty asked about aesthetics, stories, Martha about construction, materials. For the first time, I didn't feel caught between them. I felt like the point where their perspectives met. At a stall of old photographs, Betty picked up a sepia picture. 3 women from the 1920s, laughing arm in arm. One mischievous, one calm, one quietly content. "Look, it's us." Martha and I leaned in. The resemblance was startling, the dynamic, the ease. For a moment, we stood there, the illusion of a simple day out shattering. I saw it, a possible future, a reflection across a century.
Terrifying.
Breathtaking. Betty bought the postcard, tucking it into her pocket. We didn't mention it. On the drive home, as the sun set, casting long shadows, a strange peace settled over me. The back seat didn't feel lonely anymore. I leaned forward, drawn to their quiet conversation. Betty caught my eye in the rearview mirror, her smile knowing, gentle. I smiled back, a small, involuntary concession. A surrender. Crisis struck without warning. A frantic call from the Athenaeum foreman. During the final structural assessment, they'd found extensive water damage in a critical support beam, hidden for a century behind ornate plasterwork. The rot was deep, threatening the entire ceiling. My project, my sanctuary, was on the verge of collapse. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. This wasn't just a professional setback, it felt personal. I'd failed to protect the building. I stood in the cavernous reading room, staring up at the exposed, decaying wood, the weight of the vaulted ceiling pressing down. My plans, my schedules, dust. My first instinct was to retreat, solve it alone. But I was overwhelmed. City inspectors, stop work orders, budgets spiraling out of control. My world was crumbling. Without thinking, I dialed Betty. I rambled. Rot, beams, failure. She listened. When I ran out of breath, her voice was calm. "Where are you?" "We're on our way." Less than an hour later, they arrived. An island of calm in my chaos. Betty came straight to me, ignoring dust and debris, and pulled me into a firm hug. I, who flinched from most touch, leaned into her, drawing strength from her presence. Martha went to the foreman, lawyerly demeanor taking over, sharp questions, notepad out. She talked heritage grants, structural remediation precedents. Problem solver. They were a perfect team. Betty pulled a flask of whiskey from her bag, pouring it into a disposable cup. "For the shock," she said, eyes full of sympathy, not pity. She sat with me on drop cloths, talking about everything but the beam, distracting me, soothing my panic. Martha made calls, set meetings, chased leads. They stayed for hours. They didn't solve the problem, it was too massive, but they anchored me. In my earthquake, they held the ground steady. They showed me what their partnership looked like in crisis, comfort and plan side by side. As evening fell, the 3 of us stood in the silent room, looking up at the damaged beam. "It's not hopeless," Martha said, her voice echoing. "It's a complication, but it can be fixed. You just need a new plan." "And stronger support," Betty added, looking at me. In that moment, their proposal wasn't abstract. It was practical. A support system. A way to shore up the parts of me that were crumbling. For the first time, I saw what they were offering, not just what they wanted. The crisis shifted something fundamental. My defenses were breached. Logic scrambled. I was terrified of the hope they'd planted, a weed in my ordered garden. I knew I had to choose. No more gray area. I asked them to meet me at a park bench overlooking the Schuylkill River. Open space, no walls. An escape route. They arrived together, faces etched with quiet apprehension. They sat on either side of me, respectful distance between us. I took a deep breath, autumn air sharp in my lungs. "I need to be honest. What you did the other day was incredible. I'm grateful." Betty started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish." She nodded. "You've systematically taken apart every defense I have. Betty, with your art and understanding. Martha, with your logic and strength. It's a brilliant campaign." I looked between them, unflinching. "But this isn't a building. It's my life. I have to live in it." I told them about Mark. Not the sordid details, but the wreckage. How his betrayal rewired me, made me equate love with risk, commitment with loss. I built a safe life. My voice cracked. Small, quiet, but stable.
Mine.
What you're asking is to take a sledgehammer to the only structure I trust. Tears pricked my eyes. So choose. You can have my friendship, I want that. I've missed you both. Or you can have this fantasy. But not both. This limbo is tearing me apart. Choose. I laid my cards on the table: vulnerability, fear, history. Their move. Martha stared at her hands. Betty spoke, her voice devastatingly quiet. Not angry, not hurt, sad. We're not asking you to tear anything down, Angie, she said softly. We're asking you to let us help you build something stronger. She reached out, gesturing to the space between us. And you're wrong. We don't have to choose. We chose you, the day we called. She paused, words landing like a blow. The fantasy? A life without you. That's the one we won't live in. Her words stripped away my anger, my ultimatum, leaving me exposed. She hadn't accepted my terms. She'd rewritten them. I'd asked them to choose between me and their idea. She said there was no difference. I was the missing piece. And with that, I had no walls left to hide behind. I ran, not literally, but I retreated into myself, a scorched earth policy. I ignored their calls. Betty in the morning, Martha in the evening, gentle but persistent. Deleted texts unread. Worked punishing hours, staying until security kicked me out, staring at blueprints until my vision blurred. The silence I'd once cherished became a roar. My apartment felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. Gray walls pressed in clean lines like prison bars. Every quiet moment echoed with their voices, Betty's warmth, Martha's calm. Betty's book sat on my coffee table, a silent accusation. The 1920s postcard was in my jacket pocket, evidence against my isolation. I realized, with terrifying clarity, that my life wasn't a fortress, it was a tomb. I'd mistaken solitude for peace, control for happiness. Betty and Martha hadn't brought chaos, they'd brought life. Their energy, their proposal, had been a defibrillator to a heart I didn't know was stopped. Their absence ached. I missed sparring with Martha, laughing at Betty's wry observations, feeling seen, truly understood, in a way no one else had. Walls keep threats out, but they keep everything else out too: warmth, light, connection. One evening, I stared at the Athenaeum's revised blueprint, the rotted beam now supported by two steel sisters, hidden in new plaster. The old would remain, reinforced. Not torn down, but strengthened. The symbolism was painful, obvious. My life wasn't a teardown. It was a restoration. My foundation was sound, career, independence, but a critical part was failing. I'd tried to fix it alone, with emotional wood filler and prayer. But it needed reinforcement. A new kind of support. The silence in my apartment wasn't peace. It was a warning. A building about to collapse under its own weight. I had to let the noise back in. Just as the silence felt unbearable, a postcard arrived. Front, a grotesque Gothic gargoyle, stone face contorted in a silent scream. Ugly beautiful.
So me.
Back. Martha's precise handwriting. Thought of you. Hope the beam situation is resolved. No pressure, no demands, just acknowledgement. My world, my problems, mattered to them. It was an olive branch, a bridge. The door I'd slammed wasn't locked. Martha knew a plea from Betty would push me away. This was respect. We're here. When you're ready. And I was ready. I miss my friends, a word I clung to. The romantic proposal could wait. I needed to mend our original bond first. I picked up my phone, typing to Martha. The beam is a nightmare. But we have a plan. Steel reinforcements. It was technical, my language. A tentative step across the bridge. Her reply came instantly. Knew you'd figured out. You always do. A genuine smile touched my lips. First in weeks. Just two friends talking. Home. Minutes later, Betty says she found an artist who makes sculptures from salvaged wood and is resisting sending you his entire catalog. I laughed, a real laugh, echoing in the quiet. The ice wasn't just cracked. It was melting. Texting with Martha reopened communication, but I knew I had to do more. No more hiding behind screens. I had to take control. I sent a group text. I want to show you something. Saturday morning? My turf. Betty replied with excited emojis. Martha, we'll be there. Name the place. I chose an architectural salvage yard on the city's edge, a sprawling graveyard of beautiful, broken things. Ornate mantelpieces, porcelain sinks, mismatched doors, waiting for new stories. My cathedral. When they arrived, I stood by a massive stained glass window salvaged from a deconsecrated church. Wow, Betty breathed, taking in the clutter. It's a museum of could-have-beens. I see it as a library of will-be's. I corrected gently. Everything here is waiting for a new story. I led them through the aisles, nervousness fading as I stepped into my role. Expert. Guide. I explained Victorian versus Edwardian tile work, showed them a carved newel post, let them feel a solid brass doorknob. They listened, captivated by my passion. I shared the most vulnerable part of myself, not my baggage, but my soul's true north. We stopped at the stained glass window, a woman with a serene face, surrounded by blue and gold light. A thin crack ran through one blue panel. I'm buying this for my apartment, I said, tracing the crack. Over the living room window. But it's broken, Betty said softly. It's flawed. I corrected, meeting her gaze. The crack tells a story, survival. And the light still comes through. Maybe it's more beautiful because of the crack, not in spite of it. Silence. The unspoken hung in the air. Martha put a hand on my shoulder, supportive. Betty's eyes shone with understanding, deeper than affection. In that moment, among the beautiful, broken things, I felt a shift. I wasn't a project. I was a person they wanted to love. And for the first time, I showed them exactly who I was, flaws, cracks, and all. I invited them in. A few days later, Betty texted. Our place.
Dinner.
Friday. You bring the wine. Not a question. An assumption of intimacy.
I didn't resist.
I walked to their hotel suite with a bottle of Cabernet, heart steady but nervous. Martha opened the door, in comfortable slacks and a soft sweater, dish towel over her shoulder. The smell of roasting garlic filled the air. Betty hummed in the kitchenette, stirring a pot. It was domesticity, effortless, familiar. That took my breath away. This time, I wasn't a guest. Martha took the wine, our fingers brushing, easy. Chopping duty, Betty announced, pointing to a pile of vegetables. I washed my hands and joined them. We worked in sync, Martha efficient, Betty chaotic, tasting sauces, dancing to music, me in between, knife tapping rhythmically. Conversation flowed. My work, Betty's new artist, Martha's ridiculous case. The big question hung silent, but for now it was at peace. We were three people who knew each other well, making dinner. Simple. Profound. We ate at the small table, city lights twinkling outside. The food was delicious, the wine good, the company better. Warmth spread through me, not just from the Cabernet, but belonging. After dinner, we moved to the sofa, dessert on our laps. Music softened, energy shifting, quieter, more intimate. I sat in the middle. The space on either side, once a chasm, now a cradle. As conversation lulled, Betty leaned her head on my shoulder, casual and trusting. I didn't flinch. I let her stay. A moment later, Martha took my hand, fingers lacing through mine. Warm, solid, an anchor. There we were, three people, a quiet tableau. No grand declarations, no speeches. Just Betty's head on my shoulder, Martha's hand in mine, my heart beating steady. It wasn't surrender. It was arrival. This was the blueprint they'd shown me. No rule-breaking, no defiance. Just rightness. The fear lingered, a faint tremor, but for the first time, it was outweighed by the profound, breathtaking feeling of being exactly where I belonged. The weeks that followed were slow, careful construction. No magical transformation. Our new reality was an unfinished room, built day by day. Awkward moments, miscommunications, days when the unprecedented weight felt overwhelming. We learned a new language of affection in small things. Betty bringing my coffee just right, Martha sending architectural law articles, me texting them both when something funny happened. Old fears resurfaced. Days I'd wake in my quiet apartment, panicking that this was too fragile. I'd retreat, text shorter, walls going up. But they were patient, giving space until a funny postcard from Martha or a thinking of you from Betty coaxed me back. One afternoon, I stared at a blank drafting page, stuck on a library design. Betty sat beside me. No advice, just presence. Sometimes when I'm stuck on a painting, she said, I turn it upside down. See shapes, not subject. Simple advice, but exactly what I needed. I looked at the blueprint differently, and the solution clicked. Metaphor for everything. I'd focused on the impossibility of us, not the shapes beneath. Love, support, connection. We weren't a traditional couple. We were a triad, a team. Weekends together. My apartment, softened by Betty's throw blanket and Martha's books. Their hotel, neutral ground. I changed. Rigid control loosened. I learned to live with chaos, unpredictability. A structure didn't need to be conventional to be strong. Sometimes, the most resilient buildings bent with the wind. I deconstructed the fortress around my heart and, with their help, built a home. 6 months later, the Athenaeum Library reopened. The evening was cool, clear, the restored facade glowing under spotlights. Inside, the main reading room hummed with conversation, glasses clinking. The vaulted ceiling soared, the once rotted beam invisible, strengthened by steel sisters, hidden but unshakable. The room was perfect.
Whole.
I stood near the back, watching the fruit of a year's work. A hand slipped into mine, Martha's, firm and familiar. An arm wrapped around my waist. Betty, warm and solid. You did it, Angie, Betty whispered, proud. Breathtaking. We did it, I corrected, squeezing Martha's hand. The we felt natural. The project was mine, but the journey was ours. We didn't mingle much, an island in the crowd. A few glances, curious or confused, but I felt Martha's thumb brush my hand, saw Betty's protective gaze. Fear faded, replaced by quiet defiance. Our life wasn't easy. It required constant communication, exhausting honesty, navigating a world without a blueprint. Doubt lingered, moments when the weight felt heavy. But then there were moments like this. Standing between the two people I loved, I felt peace. I looked up at the ceiling's keystone, the stone that bore all weight, locking others in place. In our strange, beautiful architecture, we all took turns as the keystone, holding each other up, sharing the load. My life was no longer solitary, minimalist. It was sprawling, unconventional, sometimes chaotic, full of light, color, noise. A collaboration. Its foundation stronger than anything I could have built alone. The library director stepped up to the podium. Betty rested her head on my shoulder. Martha squeezed my hand. I looked at the restored room, at the people admiring my work, then at Betty and Martha. The future was a blank blueprint. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to draw the lines. We'd design it together. As the speeches began, Betty turned to me, her eyes soft, and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. Martha's hand tightened in mine, and she leaned in, brushing her lips against my forehead. It was two small, sincere gestures, no fanfare, no drama, just proof. We were home.